it is going to be a discussion about making your final wishes known, with a particular emphasis on the steps to take if you're part of the LGBT community, since there's a few different things that we have to keep in mind. Marriage equality obviously is continuing to sweep across the nation. Full federal recognition is at our doorsteps as we speak, which is a good thing. So now's the time for LGBT couples definitely to understand their rights as they enter into marriage, have children, and be assimilated officially and legally into our society. So our goal tonight is to help people be educated on the resources that you have available to help navigate this end-of-life process, but also to empower you with several different tools that will help you make the best decisions for everyone involved. We want this to be an open and interactive session, so please raise your hand if you have any questions at any point. And we're going to be fielding questions on Twitter as well, so if you happen to be quite tech savvy, you want to use the hashtag LGBTPlanEOL. And we'll be monitoring for those questions. And we might even have some people who couldn't attend tonight, but they are aware of the session and they might be sending in some tweets for us to ask of the panel too. To begin, I wanted to share some interesting facts, some did you know facts associated with the topic we're going to be discussing tonight. So, for example, did you know that embalming is actually not required by the state of California? It's something I didn't know about, but we have someone here on our panel who's going to shed some light on the reasons why this is the case. Did you know that if you call a funeral home and ask for a price list, they're actually required to send you one by law? Something I haven't thought about before. Another interesting one, although you may think of them as one and the same, funeral homes and cemeteries are actually run as two separately complete businesses. So you might see them on the same property, but they're run completely independently. Then on the legal side of things, did you know that all powers of attorney expire when a death occurs, except in the case of a durable power of attorney for healthcare? So that's something that I assumed if I had a power of attorney that would exist sort of forever, but once somebody dies, it does not. As well, any and all pre-need arrangements made with a cemetery or a funeral home are actually revocable at any time. And the most interesting one of all, I think, which is why you are here, did you know that although 88% of people that were recently surveyed in the US think that pre-planning for a funeral is a good idea, only 12% actually do it. So you are in the minority of people here wanting to learn more about this process. People actually spend more time planning their vacation than they do their retirement or their end-of-life arrangements. So having a good end-of-life plan in place may avert a potential crisis during a really highly stressful time and emotional time in our lives, so it's better to be prepared than to be caught off guard, of course, and that's what we're here to discuss. So we're going to talk tonight about this subject and clearly define several words and phrases that we've heard of but might not necessarily know what they mean, including what is an advance directive, what is a living will, and what's the difference between a power of attorney and a durable healthcare power of attorney. So I would like to introduce our panelists here tonight, beginning with the person here on my left is Kim Raffretti, and she's a licensed funeral director with Skylon Funeral Home in San Mateo. She graduated from San Francisco College of Mortuary Science, and she's been a licensed funeral director for more than 15 years. She actually began her career at one of San Francisco's oldest funeral homes, where she specialized in Asian funeral customs. She's an active volunteer with Adopt a Highway, Operation Freedom Paws, and the Donor Network. Sitting next to her is Michael, and I did not get your name right the first time, Michael DeSepula, and he's the director of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation's Stonewall Project. In his current role there, he and his team provide harm reduction counseling, treatment, and support services to gay men, transgendered men who have sex with men, and other men who have sex with men, as well as those with drug and alcohol abuse issues. He's worked on community health and wellness initiatives for the LGBT community for more than 20 years. And he's going to help us understand how to cope with a wide range of end-of-life issues and manage the pressures associated with the new normal that people are facing during these traumatic times in their lives. Sitting next to him is Aaron Baldwin. He's a financial services professional with New York Life. He serves as one of the first out LGBT and HIV positive agents in the insurance and financial services industry. His work at New York Life has pioneered new financial concepts and strategies, such as a first-of-the-kind positive planning practice for the HIV positive community. His involvement with grassroots HIV and AIDS and LGBT work has included roles with the AIDS Candlelight Memorial, the ADAP Advocacy Association, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, and the U.S. Selective Service. He graduated from Baldwin University, and he attended the MBA school at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Sitting next to Erin is Alma Sungi Beck. She's the president, owner, and estate planning attorney at the Beck Law Group. She's a certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law. There she helps individuals, couples, and families navigate issues relating to estates, trust, domestic partnerships, and property co-ownership, particularly as they affect unmarried and same-sex couples. Alma also leads diversity awareness workshops for law firms, legal organizations, Fortune 500 companies, and nonprofits. Last but not least, to her left is Dennis Nix. He's a certified financial planner with MassMutual. He specializes in a broad portfolio of insurance, financial products, and advisory services for high net worth families, businesses, and institutions. He's also an active member of the Golden Gate Business Association, which is the nation's first LGBT chamber of commerce and the first business organization founded by LGBT entrepreneurs. He's been part of San Francisco's LGBT community since 1980, and he's done volunteer work in the community for more than 30 years, including volunteering as a counselor, helping newly infected HIV patients and helping them understand their options regarding their financial and health benefits. So he understands, obviously, the implications of not planning for the last years of one's life, and he's happy to be here tonight and share his insight as well. So I wanted to begin with one particular question that I want each of you to answer, and anyone can feel free to answer first. Just please use the microphone. So from your professional experience, what is the one most important thing that same-sex couples need to know about the end-of-life planning in order to prevent problems in the future? And what's the most important issue as well for transgendered individuals, in particular, for what they need for the end-of-life planning process?
I think the most important thing is for them to plan ahead and make sure that the person that you want to control your disposition actually has the right to do that. There's a specific hierarchy that the state of California recognizes, and it goes durable power of attorney for health care, competent surviving spouse, and it goes on down the line. So durable power of attorney is probably, for health care, is your safest way to ensure that that person will have the right to control your disposition.
So my role here is really to talk about emotional and psychological health as it relates to these matters. And oftentimes in our culture, people don't address the emotional or psychological issues or traumas that may result from thinking about end-of-life issues and or facing those yourself or facing those as they relate to someone who you've lost. Traumas and traumatic experience tend to have a cumulative effect on people, and it's important to I would say, to say something briefly, is to really think about what some of the emotional psychological issues might be, and how might you handle some of those, and what might some of the resources be where might some of the resources be for you to get some assistance with that. Certainly, looking at family support and community support, healthy grieving, ways to be able to address and manage trauma, ways to be able to kind of look at healthy coping or adaptive coping. And a lot of folks in the gay and lesbian community and other communities oftentimes during times of trauma or stress start to use drugs or alcohol in a way that becomes maladaptive and could create a lot of harm to both themselves and to their families and communities.
I think the other thing to be thinking about is that, especially in cities like San Francisco and New York, a lot of us moved here and left our family of origin, and we have a different family here, and sometimes the family of origin has all the rights. And even if they don't, I remember during the day of the AIDS is that families would come out and see these people who were caring for someone who, as they were dying, and then come out and say, who are these people? So I think to be loving to your family is to kind of make sure that they know who's in your life and what your life is like. And that's part of end-of-life planning. And we're talking about end-of-life planning like there's, it's like, oh, you know what? I'm headed for the end of my life. And the reality is a lot of times we don't know when that is. So, it doesn't exactly happen that we have a plan. We should always have a plan. So it's just something to think about.
So I think I would echo what Kim and Dennis were saying about planning in advance. Almost any difficulty that you could imagine that could happen after your passing, whether it's at the funeral home or with your disposition or even in the hospital while you're sick and you might recover or you might not, almost every single thing you can imagine can be avoided by properly doing your documents. And the process of doing a healthcare directive, it's a very short document and it doesn't really take that long to do. But the process of having to get control over somebody's healthcare issues if they don't have documents is incredibly involved and takes a lot of involvement from the court. So if you don't have a healthcare directive in particular, then I would say set a date sometime this year by which you'll do it, whether you do it with an attorney or on your own or with the hospital, because I would probably say that of all the documents, including the will and the trust and the power of attorney for finances, probably the healthcare directive is the most important, because almost every single one of us is at some point going to need that document, maybe more than once before we pass away.
That's a good point.
With all the conversation about documentation, I think it's really important for people to understand that the plan that you put in place can be a living document. As relationships change and people predecease you and things like that, you may have to revisit these documents and update them to make sure that they execute the way you want at the time that something happens. I cannot tell you how many times, trusts where the assets weren't moved, a healthcare directive where the person is no longer married to the person who's supposed to be making the decisions, and now there's a new individual, a life insurance benefit that's paid out to an ex because the beneficiary was never changed. These documents have to be changed by the individual who executes them, or they are done by a professional at your request. If that request never comes, nobody else can change all of these documents on your behalf but yourself. They are your wishes that are to be known at the time that it becomes necessary. So remember, don't just stick them in the file and don't go back to them. When a life event happens, a divorce, you break up with somebody, you want somebody else, when you have a falling out and you want to change those things, you really have to do those on your own. We're here to help, but we don't know when a life event has occurred on your behalf.
And then, Aaron, I think you had something. Would this be an appropriate time for you to talk about how these things impact the transgender community?
From a life side, because I'm here for the life insurance, there's often conversation for trans is when to do it, life insurance planning beforehand. Some people think, oh, well, because I'm going to change my gender, will I get a better premium if, afterwards or beforehand? I would say it's always better because you're going to go through a significant transition, lots of hormones, surgery, and everything else. Those things are all going to have an effect on your rating anyhow. And that may even require that you hold off until the transition is completed. So, it's something that if you're thinking about, because you're going to have a surgery, type of situation, it may make sense to put that plan in place beforehand. And because there's going to be a nominal change, as far as gender pricing type of situation. And if you push it out several years, it's probably not going to be significant. Once you've transitioned, if you already have a policy in place, and I can't speak for every carrier, but I do think that most carriers, with a new government issue ID, at New York Life, that's all we ask for gender, is not, anything else, any proof of anything, but that you have a government issue ID that shows your new gender in your name. And we will change the policy and even issue a new policy if necessary with the gender and the name on it. type of situation.
Can I add something?
Yeah.
So we've worked with a number of transgender folks in our practice over the years, and as we know, there's a whole range on the spectrum of gender, and some people actually do a whole gender transition, and some people are somewhere on the spectrum. And so I would say that for anybody who is anywhere non-gender conforming to their birth gender, that it would be really important to add language, particularly to your healthcare directive. Because what you can say in your healthcare directive in California, the directive is actually made of 4 parts. And the first part is designating who makes decisions. The second part is disposition of remains. The third part is about living will and your wishes in the event of irreversible coma. And then you can do other things like designate your physician, talk about organ donation. But the places where I've seen it come up are, how do I want to be presented in the hospital if I don't have the capacity to discuss my presentation, and also, as was originally mentioned in the introduction, how do I want to be presented, at my funeral or memorial service or whatnot. And particularly if you have certain family members who are not necessarily fully on board with the whole where you are on the gender spectrum, that's even particularly important. And that's where it's actually particularly important also to name the people you really want to make those decisions to be in charge, so that they have priority. And in some cases, we actually put specific language saying certain people may not have any authority over my healthcare or disposition of remains. And sometimes we'll soften it by saying, but not for lack of affection. So while the healthcare document is at some level the shortest and simplest document to do, that's the place where you want to pay particular attention. For the other documents, for trans folks, it's usually pretty simple, because the other documents are about who makes financial decisions, who's in charge, and who inherits when I pass away. And those are cases where wherever people are on the gender transition or maybe non-transition process, that we can say, we can use both gender pronouns, we can use, what's currently on the license, but also known as. And that is not so impacted as long as we account for the different names and the different genders in terms of where they appear. Because as we know, the gender presentation, it doesn't always match the passport, doesn't always match the driver's license until people get to a different stage.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you so much, guys. Any questions before we move on?
When you talked about counseling and the psychological effects, in giving seminars, one of the things that we talk about is the fact that there is a rise in the amount of people that are seeking counseling and therapy because a cremation was done, but there was no closure.
Yeah.
Because so many of us in this generation are of a throwaway generation and don't realize that if we don't communicate this to family and let their head get wrapped around it early enough, they don't have a chance to adjust. Do you see that?
Well, in my work directly, I don't necessarily see that example, but I think what I do see is the disconnect between an individual choice and what family would like to see happen, or with what loved ones, family of choice would like to see happen. And oftentimes I will see individuals who are facing these issues, whether they have a life-threatening illness or they are planning end of life, that their wishes may be very different than the wishes of their family. So these are not easy conversations to have, and I think some of the other panel members will talk some more about the legal paperwork that you need to have in place to protect yourself in terms of your own individual rights. I don't think that, when you think about kind of the scope of what happened with the HIV epidemic in San Francisco and what the city and county looked like in the early 90s in particular, after many, many deaths, people don't have a really easy time or even an understanding of how to deal with trauma and loss and the combined impacts of all of that. So I think it's really critically important to kind of individualize and determine for oneself, with potentially the help of a professional, what might be some of the strategies you can take to kind of grieve and mourn through some of those things. And and to come to terms with if someone else makes a decision that you're not comfortable with. Let's say, as an example, I've worked with people who are toward their end of their life, and they want to continue to use drugs and alcohol to the degree that's not comfortable for everyone else, because that's what they want to do. In some cases, they wanted to use heroin all the way up to the very end before they died. And that's their choice. And if you want to have a relationship with that individual, you have to come to terms with how you're going to participate in that person's life, but not participate in the parts that are uncomfortable or not okay with you. And those are not easy decisions or things to have to face.
So how do we begin these conversations?
Well, I think first and foremost is recognizing that these are challenges or stresses that you're going through and not burying them. I think, recognizing that this is bringing up discomfort, that this may be bringing up sleep disturbance for you, that this may be bringing up anxiety for you, that this may be bringing up fear or maybe emotionality or irritability. It's recognizing those symptoms and being willing to kind of say, I'm going to go to a professional and have this evaluated a little bit. Sometimes, there's talk therapy, there is psychopharmacology in terms of any medical support around depression or anxiety. And there's also other things that we do, acupuncture, massage, yoga, exercise, that really may help to lift the burden of these things. I think the primary thing is if someone is living a life where they can't get beyond these things, that is definitely the sign that you need to do something, that you need to kind of take a look at it, unless you want to live a life where you're not feeling pleasure.
What I'd like to do now is just go down the panel. I'm going to have a couple of questions for each of you. So let's have a bit of a Q&A dialogue here on the different aspects of end-of-life planning. So let's start with the financial planning side first with Dennis. Can you briefly walk us through what is the financial planning process for end-of-life services?
Well, the financial planning process for end of life is basically a part of financial planning, and we're always thinking about how to grow our assets, how to protect our assets, and then at the end of our lives, how to transfer them to the people we care about. So when we're talking to clients, I don't think they generally come to a financial advisor to talk about end of life types of thing generally. When people come to us as they're getting older, one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing is we're working with someone like Alma to kind of make sure that they have the right documents in place. And then also what people don't understand is that depending on what your assets are, it may be more pertinent to give certain assets. If you're leaving money to charity, the best money to do that to generally would be your IRAs or your 401ks, because they would be taxed if you gave them to an individual, where compared to leaving your home to an individual would be much more valuable, because there would be no, at least income tax implications to that. So that's something to think about. One of the things that people don't realize, they do a lot of their documents, their wills, their trust. They've got, and the attorney like Alma's done a great job. And then what happens is they move, they change jobs, they open up a new account, and they do a number of things. And one is they don't put the assets into the trust. So one thing you always want to make sure is that if you have any asset and you have a trust, that asset should be named as into the trust. Okay, and it's a very simple thing, and it shouldn't be in your name. So everyone go home and check that. The other thing is that people assume that if they have a will and trust and all these documents, then that's how everything passes, and that's not true for a number of things. And one of the things that's most important we have people check is their beneficiary designations on their IRAs and their 401ks. They get transferred by the name that you put down as the beneficiary, okay? And it's the same thing with life insurance. And so regardless of who is your spouse, regardless of who is you want the money to go to, the insurance, and regardless of what your documents say, the insurance company and the investment company has to give that money to the person you put down on that beneficiary form. So please, if, these are the kinds of things, we want to make sure clients are thinking about. And then, of course, the other thing is making sure they have money so that they can take care of the last expenses and have it in an account that's available for them. And that's not only the last expenses aren't sometimes just the funeral, there's a lot of medical expenses. So if you see someone who's starting to, get some diagnosis of some disease, it's going to be expensive. Even if they have Medicare, they're going to have to pay co-pays. There's a lot of things that Medicare doesn't pay for. And if people have ever worked with, had a parent or someone that they've gone through this with, the government just doesn't hand out money because people are old and sick. Nothing changes, they don't do anything different. So it's something to think about the financial aspects of that too. And, I'm a big proponent of having the right insurance in place, and it's when you're thankful that you have long-term care insurance and life insurance and things like that, and health insurance.
And for the stuff that you mentioned, does financial planning differ for the LGBT community?
I think we're just aware of, first of all, that we're different people, and we have different needs. And what I was talking about earlier, that our family is not necessarily the family of origin. A lot of us have changed quite a bit when we've moved here, and we're different people when we came out. So I think we need to be aware of that and sensitive to that. So that means there's different tax planning maybe that needs to come into place, and we keep going back to the document. So, you need to have the right documents in place, obviously. And then just kind of some of the things that gay people, a friend of mine who was an attorney joked is that, like, his advertisement wanted to be that he'd have a nightstand, and put it in gay men's magazines and say, who do you want to clear out this nightstand? And some of the guys would know what I'm talking about. Some of them wouldn't, maybe. But, there's things that you don't want your parents to see, probably. Come on, we're all, So I think, there's some of those things that we're much more sensitive about. But I think for the most part, it's really more on the emotional thing now that we have marriage. And of course, the big thing with that is if they are moving, to a state that doesn't recognize marriage. And that sounds highly improbable that, someone from the LGBT community may go back to Mississippi, but they may be from there, and that's where they may end up, It seemed like a great idea. Mom's going to take care of them in Mississippi, and all of a sudden the spouse has no rights and nothing. And it also may affect benefits. So it's something to really be aware of.
Got it. Okay. How much does it cost to meet with a financial planner or to make a financial plan? What are the costs associated with that?
It's all over the board. Financial planners get paid a number of different ways. Some financial planners charge an hourly fee. Some financial planners do it under commissions where they will be paid by the product that they're selling, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because it also means that they're learning a lot of different products and they're able to do that, whereas the one who's doing it on an hourly basis isn't talking to product providers, so that's something to think about. And then and then you can do it by just having a financial plan depending on how complicated it is. What I think a lot of financial planners do in the community is they will meet with anyone for a half hour. A lot of times I meet with people who are young, just getting out of school, and they have like all this debt or something, and you can talk to them for an hour, and it's like, a half hour, do this, do that, do that. It's like a Susie Orman type of financial plan, and it's throwing goodwill out there, and hopefully it'll come back when they do that little tech startup. That's so it's always kind of a good thing.
Okay, so then a last question here. Should LGBT clients look for a financial planner who specializes in the LGBT community?
I think absolutely. I think just because they would feel more comfortable. I think one of the things that I failed to mention is when you do financial planning, a lot of it's financial, and also a lot of it is emotional. It's like counseling, because sometimes you'll sit down with a couple, they grew up very differently about money, and I think, maybe I think a a financial planner who's been in that situation, who's worked with couples, has seen that. When I work with LGBT couples, especially couples my age, two things come up. Sometimes they're couples who have been together for 20 or 30 years. And so everything they have is they grew together, okay? Then there's other couples who have gotten together. There's people my generation who had a partner for many years. Their partner died during the AIDS crisis or something, or they just broke up and they're starting a new relationship. They want to protect the assets they grew. And again, back to the documentation, what we talk to clients about is, if I should die, I want my assets to go to my partner. If my partner dies, I want my assets to then go back not to his family or his heirs, but to my heirs, who I want. So there's that special kind of planning. So sometimes when I do it, it's almost like dealing with a family that's in a second marriage. They have different assets, they may have grown a business, things like that.
Interesting. All right. Let's move on, Aaron, and talk about life insurance, since it's in the same ballpark. What challenges does the LGBT community face when they're looking for life insurance policies?
Well, I think there's a couple of different reasons that sometimes people will, look for life insurance, and that will change over a course of a lifetime. At the beginning, it could be let's say, wanting to make sure you're protecting your parents from if they've co-signed on your student loans and now they're, $100,000, $200,000, you don't want them to incur that expense. So sometimes it's for that reason. It could be then for mortgage protection for the first home that you get. Then it could, transition into something like building a bucket of tax-free income that you can utilize as supplemental retirement income and a tool for hedging the market in retirement. So life insurance is not always for a particular reason. Business owners may have a need for life insurance to protect the business in the event that somebody dies. Consider the movie Mommy Dearest, where Joan Crawford winds up at the Pepsi-Cola board, on the board because she inherited her husband's shares. That type of situation is something that particularly is concerning to LGBT individuals who are in businesses with heterosexual individuals, that they might wind up in business with their spouse who may know nothing about the business, but because there's no way to pay out the estate because there's no insurance, they're either going to take the money out of the business and the business may implode, or the life insurance will pay out, they will take their shares and the business will continue. So it's very complex, but particularly for LGBT, it's often not death benefit focused life insurance. It can be if there's a particular reason, if they do have a partner, if they have children. And it is changing as our families become more similar to everyday families and we start adding children and other things. The planning is going to be specific to the individual. It's the type of situation as it is with most insurance products. You buy the products with age and health. So what I say to individuals, particularly within our community, because we do have we can be confronted with many health-related issues on various different sides, is trying to get into these products later in life when you may have health issues or because you're older, may make it so that you can't get into them at all. So, even starting out with, particularly term insurance and then doing something with it later, once you have it, at least you have options. So that's what I would say. I already addressed the trans aspect of, that type of planning. So really, for LGBT, I know of no carriers, but I deal with, predominantly large carriers who exclude people who are LGBT, from coverage. It's not a question for those of us, at least in my company, who are LGBT agents. They track our production, not our clients, because our clients don't disclose And often for LGBT, they have no desire to disclose to financial professionals their sexuality for fear of getting bad advice if they're not talking to an LGBT agent. So I do, as Dennis said, I do think it's important that when you're LGBT to have an LGBT professional working with you who understands you and your community, and because of the nuances can help guide you to the right professionals, like I would with Alma for the documentation and Mike, for other stuff.
So how can people actually ensure that their life insurance provider is LGBT friendly if
Well-
they're not part of the community?
The best way to obviously do that is to go to the HRC, the Corporate Equality Index. Again, you're going to be in front of an individual who works for a company. So, I mean, the company could do whatever it wants and, have all the policies, but you're dealing with an individual for your advice. But I would go to and make sure that the company you're dealing with, is LGBT friendly. You want to make sure that they, have 100% corporate equality index, rating, and to make sure that they value their employees, internally, because that should give you a good indication of how they're also going to be customer facing.
I have a scenario here. Tell me about this. So let's say that I'm in a civil union and with my longtime partner, so we're not married, but a civil union. We have children. Will they be covered by our life insurance policy, even if we're not officially married?
Okay, well, life insurance doesn't follow family members. It follows the beneficiary. So if you choose as beneficiaries your children, it won't matter if you're as long as you've been able to prove there's an insurable interest when you take the life insurance policy for the individual that you insure, you can carry that policy. If it's just the beneficiaries, then you designate the beneficiary, whether it's your dogs, your alma mater, your husband, wife, sister, it really doesn't matter. You get to select who your beneficiary is. However, as Dennis was saying, if you have a large life insurance policy and you want your children to be the beneficiary of that, dropping it into a trust that then dictates how those proceeds are dispersed is always the best way to do it. So, the will says who it goes to, the trust says how it gets there. So if you're talking about significant assets or, significant death benefit, it's always best to have the trust dictate your wishes as to how those proceeds are then dispersed to the beneficiaries.
Let's move on and talk about funeral planning with Kim. So is funeral planning different for an LGBT person than it is for other people? And if it is, how?
I think that many LGBT people are often estranged from their families, and that's why pre-planning is so important, and making your own funeral arrangements is so important. And I think that goes across the board for everyone. I mean, I really believe that everyone should make their own funeral arrangements. That's how we're certain that our wishes are carried out. My partner and I are not married, but we have a durable power of attorney for health care. And to break it down, if we did not have that, my brothers would have control over my disposition. And they might likely bury me in a dress. And, I don't want to spend eternity in pantyhose. I think that, planning in advance is the best way to ensure that we get what we want.
And so what's the best way to ensure that those wishes are honored and not changed after you pass?
With pre-planning, also make sure that someone knows what your plans are. I can pre-plan and write everything out and sign everything, go meet with my family service counselor and put it in my drawer at home, and nobody knows that I've done that. And then I pass away, and sure enough, here come my brothers. So if, really pre-plan, let someone know that you've made these arrangements, let many people know. I change my mind on a daily basis, but I think that's the best way, is just to make the plans and then let people know.
So let's say, as you were saying, an LGBT couple that's not married has parents who don't agree with their lifestyle or family members. How can the living member of that couple ensure that the partner actually has control, other than is basically just legal documents?
It's
and
legal documents.
knowledge?
I mean, the state of California definitely has their hierarchy of priority hierarchy of who's in control. So the durable power of healthcare is number one, supersedes anybody. Yeah, I mean, it just, I don't want to be redundant, but I want to keep going back to the durable power of attorney for healthcare. It's the most important document. Even though, marriage is on the rise, I just really think that this document is the most important for us to have.
Because it supersedes any sort of marriage or civil union
It can't.
documents.
I've had married couples come in, and the husband or the wife does not have the right to control disposition. Somebody else. They've given the right to somebody else, for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason is, but the right goes to someone else, and they've chosen that person to take care of their funeral arrangements.
Wow. All right. When should people start researching their end-of-life services and the burial arrangements?
They should start when they are healthy and not emotional about it. When someone passes away, we panic. We don't make rational decisions. We're in a big rush to take care of things, and we might do things that we don't want to. We might spend money we don't want to. So if you plan ahead, when you have a clear mind and you're not in a hurry, I think you're going to make the best decisions.
Tell us about some good conversation starters for couples who haven't talked about this, but one of them maybe want to, and maybe one of them doesn't. Good dinner time conversation?
This is a tough one, but a question that I think is a good conversation starter is burial or cremation. I'm always asking people, and people ask me, do you want to be buried or cremated? There's a big difference between the two. And I think that's just sort of like start there and work your way backwards. So if you want to be buried, do you want an open casket, closed casket? There's so many different choices that we have when making a funeral arrangement and how we want it carried out. I just think starting with a simple question and then moving backwards.
Yeah. All right.
Hi, Kim. Hey, can you tell me, I'm 60 and, I think I'm living another 30 years. And, who knows? But if I make plans now and I talk to, Skylon and do that, and what happens if I change my mind and I end up, going to Florida or something? How does that anything happen? So I'm dead if I go to Florida.
Lori is far more knowledgeable about this than I am. So.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lori Michelson. I work for Skyline at this time, but I've been in the industry for 20 years, and I'm happy to answer any questions after this session. The question now.
You do it now, and something changes, and you've already paid for it, I guess.
You're going to love this, Dennis. Every money that's collected, all monies collected for any funeral or cemetery arrangements are in a trust protected by the FTC and are completely revocable at any time. However, not property. Not the place that you've chosen, the niche, the space, the crypt. That usually is yours by deed, and you have to then decide what to do with that property. But all the rest of the funds that you've put aside for the service, the embalming, the transportation, all of that is recoverable and refundable with no questions asked at any time. And you can also trade. if you're working with a company where you have a plan and they have a sister company in another state, like we have many, many locations across the United States, our company, often it's transferable, one to the other, which means that not only the funds are transferable, but it must be equal value.
Let's talk about estate planning with Alma. So what documents are needed to ensure that the end-of-life decisions regarding disposition of remains and the funeral services are met? And how specific should people be in those?
So the disposition of remains can appear in either the healthcare directive or the will. I think it's when attorneys are drafting the documents, it tends to be kind of an attorney preference. Our firm prefers to put it in the healthcare directive because there's a natural place for that in the California Advanced Healthcare Directive form. But it can be put in the will, but part of why we put it regularly in the healthcare directive is so that we don't accidentally make a conflict with what might be in the will. In terms of how specific, I mean, I almost feel like I need to ask Kim this because we get a lot of clients. The people that are able to be specific are people who have had experience with people close to them who've passed away and they have ideas. Or they've been thinking about it themselves because they might be terminal or have a certain chronic condition. But I have to say that, you know, of all the clients who come to see us, like well over 80% of them are like, I don't know. And then we sit there, you know, I'll sit there with couples, whether they're straight couples or same-sex couples or whatnot, and they've never talked about it with each other. And some of them have been together for decades. And so I asked the question exactly like that. So do you prefer cremation or burial? Or neither? And then sometimes I'll have the first conversation about it sitting there across from me in the office, and when we'll say cremation, really? And then they'll have like, I didn't know you wanted that. And so that's as far as they can get. And you know, I think so in terms of the document, the healthcare directive, in terms of how specific, I think it's personal. I'm interested to hear what Kim has to say about how specific is useful. But the other thing I would say is the person or people that you name, I think, is as important because it's hard to anticipate. Just like with the other parts of the healthcare directive, it's like, I don't know what kind of condition I might be in the hospital. And, you know, the doctor clients, they can be really specific. I only want life support for 24 hours, no, for 2 weeks at the most. And other people who aren't in the medical industry will say, I want life support for at least 6 months. And I'm like, well, why don't you talk to your doctors about that? Because it's interesting the doctors want it for a shorter period, and that's because they see it every day. And so that's the other thing, is that if you haven't thought through all the details, at least you want to pick the people that are close enough to you that would have the best judgment and give them as much guidance as you can. But a lot of people just say, up to my agent, and so then I'll go back to like, are you sure this is the right person? And then sometimes people are like, oh, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll have them be co-agent with my brother or something like that.
Are there special issues that LGBT people should consider in these documents related to this stuff that's different than heterosexuals?
So in some ways, it's the same because you can put, this is where you get to be specific, whether it's your healthcare directive or your power of attorney or your will or your trust. But there are definitely special issues for LGBT folks, whether you're coupled or not. For same-sex couples, there's always a question of, are you married? Are you domestic partnered? And in California, marriage has been recognized here for same-sex couples at least since 2008, and then again in 2013. And so, you know, and then sometimes people don't know. So it's interesting. Those are some of the special issues that come up where it's like, I've had clients who think they're domestic partnered in the state and they turn out not to be. It's rare that people think they're married and they're not, but at least for domestic partnership, there's enough kind of variation and confusion. And then there's a lot of people who didn't want to rush to get married, but they, even after the Windsor decision in 2013, which is what brought federal recognition, a lot of couples are trying to figure out whether to get married because it's actually the older couples that they've been together a long time. They're like, well, it's worked for us this way. And so that's an important conversation we'll have. So that seems to be more prevalent, although technically speaking, it's exactly the same conversation as if a straight unmarried couple came to see us and we're trying to figure out whether or not they should get married. It's just there's a cultural lens, and so people are more willing and interested in being strategic in the LGBT community in order to plan around the ways that we've been discriminated against historically. There's one more thing I would say is I was mentioning some of the special language we use for trans folks, and I would just add that if you or your partner or people close to you are trans or on the gender non-conforming spectrum, that it is important to think about additional things, particularly on your healthcare directive, not about how you want to be in the hospital and how you want to be at the funeral or memorial service.
So let's say that let's take an LGBT couple in which both partners, they're perfectly healthy. When should they start creating this living will and meet with an estate planner?
Well, as a general matter, I think everybody, whether they're coupled or single, should at least have a healthcare directive and a power of attorney for finances, and probably also a will. And some people do them on their own, although I think at least you should get it reviewed by an attorney if you do it on your own. The time when you should start seeing an attorney is when you start thinking you might need a trust. And the trust comes up, a living trust or an irrevocable trust, but it comes up around when people own property, when they have minor children, when there's anybody who has any kind of special needs in terms of how you would leave things for them, whether they're on government benefits or they have trouble managing money or they have that difficult spouse or whatever it is. And so that's where a trust can be really important to make sure that the people that you leave behind don't have to deal with a lot of complication. So there's kind of two parts. One is when should people have documents, and I'd say anybody who's a adult with capacity should have at least the first three, and then the conversation about the trust should happen maybe when one of those other things happen.
That's good. That's actually good. What is the difference between a living trust and a will, and why are they important each?
So a will is what you would normally think it would be, which is it's a document where you say where your stuff goes, who's in charge, and if you have minor children, who would be the guardian for the minor children, or who you want to be the guardian. A lot of people don't realize that the guardian is actually appointed by the court based on the best interest of the child. So the person you nominate might not be the person who becomes the guardian, but it is given extremely heavy weight when the parents nominate somebody. And unless there's some really major reason why they shouldn't be guardian, then they would most likely be guardian. So some people handwrite it. I don't recommend it. I do recommend that you see an attorney about your will. It's a very important legal document, but some people do them online. Again, I don't recommend it unless you get it reviewed by an attorney. So the difference with a trust is that a trust is an agreement. It's more like a contract, but functionally speaking, what a trust does is it can span what a will does and what a power of attorney for finances do. And so the way I like to frame it for people is that those first three, the healthcare directive, the power of attorney, the will, those are the essential documents that I think everybody should have. The trust is something you do if there's certain things that you're trying to plan for to avoid problems. And so the two main reasons why people would set up a trust would be, one is if they care about the court supervised probate process, and we call that probate for short. And so if you want to avoid probate because you have the certain kinds of assets that would trigger a probate, generally it's real property if it's over 50,000 or other property if it's over 150,000, but it doesn't include the things Dennis mentioned that go directly to people. So a lot of couples, for instance, will have everything joint and then name their partner as the primary beneficiary. And so they literally have nothing that would go under their will. Everything would either go by right of survivorship or directly. That's actually the most important part. But if your probate assets would be over 150,000, then you should strongly consider a trust, because the probate process in California is one of the most expensive, time-consuming in the country. There are many, many states where people don't care about probate, most of them actually. But here in California, it's taking about 1 to 3 months to get a probate started and finished. And in some cases, it's taking 4 months just to get a court date. So you petition and then you're not even heard for like 4 months. So that's one reason. And then the other main reason to consider a living trust would be for protecting others. And so when you're thinking about this is really about who is going to inherit from you and what kind of protections do you want to create. So one example would be estate taxes. There are federal estate taxes for if your estate is over 5.43 million. These days, that's actually statistically only 0.17% of people in the US, so it's less of an issue than it was 10 years ago when the exemption was much lower. So the other issue that can come up is minor children. So any parents, even if they don't have a large estate, are usually not excited about their child becoming 18 and then inheriting like even $10,000. Can you just imagine like an 18-year-old with $10,000? Not to mention the house and all the retirement accounts and everything else. Other protections include things like, I've already mentioned people that might be on public benefits, particularly when they're asset or needs-based, like SSI and Medicaid or Medi-Cal. Those, you are only entitled to it if you have a certain amount of assets, or if you're under a certain amount of assets. And so getting an inheritance can totally mess up your public benefits. And then other examples would be sometimes people don't have any issues like that, but you want to create protections from creditors. And so what you can do is, even for the people who have no issues currently, they may have no creditor issues, you can set up a trust to hold things in trust for them during their life and down the generations. So if they ever get in a divorce or a lawsuit or a car accident, and so this is where I like talking to the parents. I was like, the couple that came in today have an 11-month-old, and I was like, just imagine when he turns 16 and starts driving. So that's the question: is do you want to create creditor protections in case you're gone and somebody tries to sue them? So those are the different reasons. And so really a lot of it, it's funny because, you know, these are all issues that are not about you so much, but about the people who survive you, because I'm gone. I don't care about the probate. I don't have to do the probate on my own estate. I don't have to pay my own estate taxes. The people have to deal with it for my estate. And so then that's where people start thinking, oh, I want everything to go to my partner. Okay, well, maybe there's no probate, but what happens when you're both gone? Oh, and then this is at least 50% of the couples that come in. They're like, I haven't thought of that. I was like, okay, so that's what we need to think about, because that's where the probate issue or the estate tax issue is going to be bigger. So that's the long-winded answer.
Oh, that's good.
I hope that's helpful.
It's definitely stuff, and I have not thought about that before, so yeah. Any questions? Yes. Go for it.
So we're talking about lots of couples. How about single, gay, slutty guys like me? What kind of planning can they do? And also, if my family is in a different country.
Okay, so when you're single, then at some level, it's the same question, which is who would inherit from you and how much do you care about the trouble they'd have to go through with probate or whatnot. Usually when it goes to people that you care about, that's where it's like, if I have a house or I have assets over $150,000, that would be a good idea to at least talk to an estate planning attorney about whether to set up a trust. Because if you can set up a trust, it can save a tremendous amount of money and hassle and problems, right? In terms of leaving things to people in other countries, it depends on what country. There's some countries like Cuba where there could be issues about leaving things directly to people because of government intervention, right? But if there's not an issue like that and people can inherit fine, then usually I say just name them. And this is a case where we would not necessarily want, we talked about creditor protections, but usually that's for when your beneficiaries are in the U.S. because it's based on U.S. creditor protection law. But if you're leaving things to people outside the U.S., I'd say, you know what, just give it to them or talk to a lawyer there about something you can set up there that would protect from creditors. And literally what happens is then your stuff might potentially be in a trust, for instance, and then your trustee, you want to pick somebody probably who's in the U.S. If you don't have someone that you trust to do that job, there are professionals that do it. There are corporate trust companies and banks that can do it. And this is another reason why it's helpful to work with an attorney, because we have relationships and we can recommend people. And the trustee does all that work. They go through your stuff, they figure out how to appraise things, they do your final taxes, and then when they're done, they close the trust and they just write a check to your family members or wire the money or write traveler's checks or whatever it is so that they can inherit things. So it is at some level could be more important when you're single, especially if you're trying to provide for family.
Wow. All right, let's move on to the grieving process with Mike. Couple of questions for you, Mike. So facing end-of-life issues for yourself or for your loved ones, it's stressful and traumatic many of the times. At what point should a person seek outside support, such as one-on-one counseling, group counseling, or other kinds of professional support?
So I started covering this a little bit earlier, and I think it's difficult for folks in the United States to kind of conceptualize emotional health and understand with some divinity really what that means. But it really means, are you able to kind of have a life that's filled with hope and an ability to kind of plan for the future, have the relationships you want to have, be able to have good hygiene around ability to sleep, ability to eat, ability to not be losing weight because you're so anxious and you can't eat, all of these different things. So I think, simply I don't want to say to you that I want to give you short or small tool to be able to assess your own level of depression or anxiety or other things. But I guess what I would say is understanding some of the signs that you may be going through that maybe you could identify that you're having some emotional difficulty managing these situations. For LGBT people in particular, I think there's certainly systems that are designed specifically to work with LGBT people. There are hospices that are designed to work with LGBT people around end-of-life issues. They are an amazing resource for both group and individual support. There are psychological groups. Gay Lesta is one of the group of therapists that's gay and lesbian focused that could help you find a counselor or therapist that could help you. If you're struggling with coping and you've been using drugs or alcohol and that's something you want to look at, either from an outpatient or inpatient perspective, then you can dial 311 and find the City Department of Substance Use and Mental Health, and they can make some recommendations to you. There are programs that are funded specifically to work with gay men or LGBTQ individuals, and they can give you resources for that in terms of which programs might be best matched for you. And I think understanding if you are going to do substance use treatment, either outpatient or inpatient, trying to understand from a professional what are some of your goals and objectives. If your goals and objectives are to continue to use drugs and alcohol, but to have your life work for you better and to be able to manage your relationships, your finances, maybe there's been some harm that's coming to you because you're coping with drugs and alcohol over and above to a degree that's actually starting to create harm for you, that there are programs that are specifically designed to help you kind of manage that and think that through for yourself and help you create your own individual goals around that. So I think it's kind of demystifying these things. You don't have to be debilitated in a depressed state. You don't have to identify as an alcoholic or as a drug addict. And I don't even think that those terms really necessarily matter. If they matter to you, that's cool, but they don't necessarily matter to me, who is someone in the field. I think the truth is, if you feel like you're struggling and you notice that, and other people notice that, in your behavior, in your mood, in your ability to feel hope and be able to have relationships that are healthy and supportive, a lot of people, after many years of grief, they just start going away. They stop going out and socializing. They don't allow new opportunities for relationships to develop in their lives. They stop. They're so frightened of additional loss and grief that they don't even engage in new relationships, which basically keeps them in that same place of loss for an extended period of time. And it is difficult to move from one place in your life to move on to the next place. And grief does change us, but it is an important goal to be able to integrate that grief and to be able to make some decisions about what the next phase of your life might be. And there are professionals who can help do that, as I said.
So how might someone dealing with end-of-life issues or aging as well manage the pressures that come from family members or friends that are struggling with these realities as well?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, because I think community members, family members, partners may have different goals and objectives as it relates to end-of-life issues for you. And just like people on the panel are talking about, it's not easy to make decisions, a couple to make decisions about, who their beneficiary may be if one of them is no longer around. It's super difficult to talk about these issues because people don't feel comfortable talking about it. Yet at the same time, I think it's really important to try to find the folks in your network who you feel share your ideals around some of these things. And in addition, if you can't find people who share the ideals that you have, is to be able to, from a personal perspective, if you're the person who is dealing with end of life issues, is to be able to have the support that you need, whether that's professional or friendship network, to be able to articulate the things that you want and you need, and to not have to be able to take care of everyone else to the degree where that debilitates your own ability to get your needs met. That's also not necessarily an easy thing to do, but these are choices to make. And I think that, I've worked with many people, including somebody who was a very close friend of mine who passed from liver disease, and his big struggle was taking care of everyone else's emotional needs around his illness. And that actually takes a lot of the joy out of the life of somebody who is dealing with end-of-life issues. So I think professionals can actually help people recognize some of those things, and they can help them put some things in place that can prevent that to some degree, and also create some boundaries around that. And if somebody, for instance, is not comfortable with the fact that you are going to become cremated, then that's not the person that's going to be responsible for those decisions. Maybe they're responsible for certain pieces of the decisions, but they're not responsible for others. I had durable power of attorney for a friend that passed, and I got the chance to be able to say when the machine was going to be turned off. And his family would have made a completely different decision. And we were all in the room at the same time. And I still made the decision because I was given that authority from my friend, and made sure that I carried out his wishes as he wanted them. That wasn't always easy to be in the room, so even the people who are left, if someone does pass, also have to think about, how does it feel to make the decision to turn the machine off? How does it feel for you? Are you even ready to handle that issue? Are you able to talk about it even before it happens, so that you can kind of even start to conceptualize what might come up for you emotionally when that decision has to be made? Because it is not an easy thing to go through. And a lot of people experience it as a very traumatic life event, and have not taken the time beforehand to consider what it might be like to actually make those decisions.
Wow. All right. Another question here. How would someone prevent an unintentional overdose for those coping with end-of-life issues, including chronic illness or aging?
Yeah, I'm really glad that we added this question, because I think it's one that often isn't discussed. If someone is using pain medications or morphine or other medications, that may be part of their treatment plan with their primary care providers, or it may be just something that they're using to cope outside of the plan with their medical provider. It's important for folks who are in that situation to have people around them who know what they're doing, because someone may be using morphine or other opiates and accidentally kill themselves or harm themselves before any intention to do so. I think this leads to issues of self-delivery and other things, and self-delivery is a whole nother topic, and is a much longer term decision. But if someone is managing his or her pain and they actually happen to overdo it, there's very easy resources for family members and friends and communities to have. There's a project in San Francisco, it's called the DOPE Project, where you can get Narcan, or naloxone is the generic name, and basically it's an injection or 2 injections where you give someone, and it dissipates the impact of an opiate. So it takes the person immediately out of the overdose. The person does not have to die before they're ready. You don't have to endure someone actually overdoing it with medications by accident and killing themselves before they were ready and before the family was ready. So I think this is an important consideration, especially for people that are doing morphine and maybe they're drinking, maybe they're taking some Oxycontins, and maybe they're drinking, and maybe they're not feeling really well emotionally, and they may overdo it. So I think that those type of conversations are critical to have. And I think also, for those of us even not necessarily dealing with end-of-life issues, if we're out there partying or playing or doing that kind of stuff with folks, and we know people are using pills and other medications, morphine, whatever, it's important for us to kind of get naloxone into the hands of folks who can save lives.
All right. Any other questions?
I just went through a situation, unfortunately, when you're in my industry. People don't often call you beforehand to do the planning, But they certainly call you when the situation is occurring, type of situation. And a close friend of mine who lived 1 block away wound up in a situation where he was, on Thursday, it was diagnosed that he was clinically brain dead. The chosen family here in San Francisco is in conversation with the birth family in Honduras and some here. The decision is made before anything will happen because there is no healthcare directive to wait until the birth family makes it there. So, all of the chosen family here are prepared that when they get there, the decision will be made. The family, when they get there, decides that they want one more test just to make sure that the person is in fact clinically brain dead and there's no chance. So everybody goes home, thinking that was going, that it was all going to be taken care of that day. It's not. Test comes back the next day, type of situation. Yes, it's all. Everybody reassemble, on Sunday to make the decision. Then they all go through the process of, okay, now here's all the paperwork. There's an hour's worth of paperwork that we're going to have to fill it out. Next thing you know, the ex, who is still in a domestic partnership because it was never dissolved, comes in and decides he wants another test because now he is the person with the authority in the room because, again, it defaults now to him because he has a domestic partnership that was never dissolved. Whole loop again, everybody gets back together again at the hospital. And again, then the paperwork that was ceased the day before now all happens. They bring up the sedatives before this is actually resolved. Then, of course, to make the situation worse, is somebody starts thinking, okay, there's no life insurance and there's no funds for this arrangements with the funeral home, start selling assets, says the current boyfriend, and the ex-boyfriend, who still is the domestic partner, says, oh no, those aren't your assets to sell. And then a GoFundMe page goes up for the final expenses. This is a nightmare for everybody involved in the situation, including the family from Honduras who's culturally and language-wise trying to figure out what the hell is going on in this room. This is an example that often happens, particularly within the LGBT community, where there are different families and individuals, but no documentation. And so that's a very real situation that just happened 2 weeks ago. So everything that we're talking about is important. It's important that you not put the people who love you the most through all of that pain by not having your decisions known beforehand. Because when the decisions are made and the document comes out, the conversation ends. Whether the family agrees, the chosen family, the current boyfriend or the ex-boyfriend agrees, that paper then takes over, and that's what dictates happens.
I would add with that, yes, the paper dictates what's going to happen, but there are opportunities to have discussions beforehand. Whether or not people love the decisions that you've made, you can communicate those decisions. And I think it really is critical that you communicate those decisions. So when folks are sitting in the waiting room in the ICU, there doesn't start to be huge arguments there and additional trauma added to everyone. Making those decisions is not easy for the people who are remaining. And I think having some consciousness about the fact that it is difficult to talk to your parents or loved ones about certain decisions, but that's part of the responsibility of planning for end of life. Is not only creating the documents, but communicating with everyone about what your wishes are.
The thing I would add is, if I was thinking about who I was naming to make these final decisions, like the medical decisions, the pull the plug decision, I can appreciate how difficult that is, or that was for you, or the disposition of remains. Like for the pull the plug and the healthcare decisions, I actually think most people have no idea what they would be faced with. And that's where sitting down with the person that you would name, whether it's your partner or your best friend or just the person that you trust the most with that decision, and maybe meeting with your emergency room doctor friend or your actual like primary care physician or something. The difficulty about the primary care physician is you have to then pay your copay and they only give you 10 minutes. So maybe you could find like your professionals or, but people who actually can help you think kind of from a neutral perspective of like what are the important things that they'd want to see. And it can be a way to kind of vet out your whether your chosen agent has the stomach for it. There was a period of time where I had named somebody, but I wasn't sure if that person had the stomach for it. So then I named my brother as co-agent because my brother, he's a primary care doctor. So but then at some point the conversation evolved and I was able to take him off and name him secondary. So it helps at least to kind of anticipate it. But the hard part is that it's tough to have that conversation, and you just want to make sure not to do it before it's too late. So that's the important thing.
We have a question back here. Hi, I work with families that are going through death and dying issues, and I often find that there's a resistance to seeking psychological help, especially with older people who are going through it. So I was curious what specific resources are available, and also often it gets entwined with financial issues around not knowing how much money they'll have left and what it will cost. So are there free services that are available as well for those people?
Well, I think there's senior centers that could be able to offer referrals and resources, and certainly if someone is in hospice, there's lots of opportunities. More for the family members. I think that these centers could also make referrals for family members. These are not things that are uncommon to come up in these circumstances. I also think it's kind of buyer beware. I mean, we all have to decide who is the best type of person for us to work with individually. And people have to have a willingness to do it. I mean, one of the things that happens when family members start arguing is they get entrenched in their opinion or thoughts, and they're unwilling to yield. And I think that's part of the conversation from the perspective of the person who is at end of life. There was a conversation with my grandfather before he passed to my mother and my aunt, who were not seeing eye to eye about certain things. And part of his wish was that they found a way to deal with that, and that they found a way to manage the fact that these were his wishes, whether they liked them personally or not. It's really difficult. I used to also work in an emergency department, and I remember there was a young woman, only 37 at the time, who had really end-stage cancer. And the family kept bringing her into that ER, and she was living for them day after day because they wouldn't let her go. So I think, when you start talking of end-of-life issues, you're also talking about the ability for people to be able to give permission for people to die when they're ready. And it's unkind to the person who is dying to make them hold on because you can't deal with your grief, for them to have to go through more pain. So I know that's not an easy issue, but certainly for my role in a family and in families of choice, when I see that happening, I name it and I try to offer support, but I also try to offer pressure about this is not about the person dying, this is about you and your inability to be able to manage this. And I think that good counselors and family therapists in programs in hospice and other things should have a good toolbox to be able to know how to manage some of these situations in a way that may be able to assist. But the family members have to be have a willingness to engage.
Yeah, is there anything that's maybe a more approachable resource? Is there anything that's a more approachable resource, especially when dealing with older generation people? Because I found that once you get to people who were born maybe before the 60s or the 50s, there's a big resistance to seeing mental help as you being defective in some way as opposed to it actually being helpful in some way.
Yeah, I think it's trying to find people that they trust. Some people, it's helpful when some folks who are elderly become involved in senior centers where they start to trust some of the people there. The Jewish Community Center and Elder Services has a really great reputation. It is a hard issue, and I think it's not only just towards people who are older generation, but it's also in terms of different ethnicities and races and where people came from in their countries of origin that impact whether they're willing to look at some of the psychological issues. I think the best that we can do is just kind of identify, here's some of the things that I'm seeing that don't seem to be working really well for you, and ask someone what their goals and objectives are. And, really point out if someone's goals and objectives are different than, they're in direct opposition to what they're trying to accomplish, then suggest some alternatives for ways, or ask them what they think some alternatives might be for doing that differently. Maybe they won't get everything that they want, but I don't force people to do things they don't want to do, but I help them identify whether what they're doing is working in the way they want to, and if it's not, what might be some of the alternatives that might get them there.
I also find that hospitals and long-term care facilities, if that's where people are, generally have social workers on staff. And so not everyone's going to be able to call up Mike and be like, Mike, what should we do? My family's freaking out. But a lot of the facilities actually have them on staff, and you should definitely feel free to pull them in. And even if there's resistance, you could pull them in on the guise of, well, they're just here to, their job is to actually tell us what our various options are. And then if they happen to listen really well to your parents who are resistant to therapy and help them work through issues, great. It's just added resource. But I think they bring them on staff exactly for that reason.
Counselors are really well trained on how to try to connect and join with people. I mean, and certainly around these issues, it's not easy to do that. But if there is a way, if you have somebody who is a really effective provider, they might be able to find some way to create some bridge.
I guess kind of to change the topic a little bit, because I was thinking of this as we were talking, and it's a little bit of a thing. When we do planning, when I do financial planning, it's a plan, and it changes, because what you're kind of doing is saying, okay, we're going to take a ship, a sailboat, and we're going to go to Hawaii. In the time between here and Hawaii, the wind's going to change, the surf's going to change, it's going to rain, things like that. So you want to change that. And I think the thing, and is the same with estate planning documents and things like that. You make a decision, and you do it for, I tell my clients, look at it for 3 or 5 years, because what they start doing is start thinking, well, what if so-and-so's talking about moving to Palm Springs? What if they move there? Just kind of think of it for today. I think the other benefit of doing it when you're young and healthy is it's not overwhelming, and as you change it, because if you live a long life, you'll probably have done it 3 or 4 times, looked at your will and trust, and it won't be this overwhelming thing, and you'll have thought of things, and you've written something down, and that's freeing, actually, to know that, things are going to be taken care of. And I am a single person also, and someone told me, have everything done, because your family will spit on your grave if they have to go through probate in California. Is that true? Yeah. So just get it done, get it organized, and it's freeing, and it's kind of nice to know, what, if there's ever some weird thing, it's like, what, Michael's going to take care of stuff, and I've talked to Michael about this, and he knows what to do, and, I'm going to have tulips around my grave, because that's what I want, and it's just kind of a nice thing to do, and it's not the end-of-life decision, anyhow.
On the 3 to 5 years, I tell my clients exactly the same thing. So even if you don't update it every 3 to 5 years, you should pull it out and review it with your attorney. You should review your financial plan every 3 to 5 years. You should review your life insurance beneficiaries, your retirement beneficiaries. Just make sure that things are current, because lots can happen. The other thing about the 3 to 5 years is some people do this thing where they're like, I'm only 35. When I'm 80 and I pass away, and I'm like, wait. We're doing the plan in case something unexpected happens in the next 5 years, but try not to go too far beyond that, because who the heck knows? And it's already who the heck knows in the first 5 years, but you're doing it just in case, and then you should review it every 3 to 5.
Can I ask a question? Kim, if I went ahead and pre-planned for myself, we talk about everybody having their own opinion and wanting to change things. Could somebody else come in and change what I have pre-planned?
No, they cannot. That's why it's so important to pre-plan for yourself. I mean, that's the ideal thing to do because your children can't come in, or your spouse or your partner or whoever it may be, your best friend, they cannot come in and change what you've arranged for yourself. If it's prepaid, yes, prepaid, which, I mean, the majority of pre-planned funerals are prepaid, pre-funded.
And does that go up?
No, you're locking in those prices.
Wow.
You're locking in today's prices.
Financial planners like that.
Yeah, everything we've discussed today is really your plan, but I think it's really important, especially in a city like San Francisco, that when you're making sure that you have things done, all those plans can be impacted by children, and things that could happen there, and parents. This town is being particularly squeezed hard because, the perception is, and particularly with LGBT, is you live in San Francisco, you make good money, and if you're not having conversation with your parents about what their planning is, that responsibility could become yours. And what you could be doing is using your money that you're planning for tomorrow, today, to take care of mom and dad, or mom or dad type of situation. So as you're having conversations, it makes sense, maybe not in the middle of Thanksgiving or holiday dinner, but that you ask and see if there's something in place. And if there's not something in place, maybe you want to consider either yourself or with your siblings of putting some protection in place for that, because your plan could be impacted by so many variables outside of yourself. And so that is something to consider when you're considering this, is what could be, a liability to the plan that you've put in place.
David, I wanted to talk with you about how people talk in code. All of these subjects people tend to avoid, okay? And you'll hear things from people like, I've got it taken care of. You know what that means? I don't want to talk about it. Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of it. You know what that means? I don't want to talk about it. There are so many things that people do to avoid talking about this, but you need to make it your personal responsibility to ensure that your wishes are followed. And everybody here tonight has said it's the Advanced Healthcare Directive for healthcare. It's the power of attorney for healthcare that is the most important document that will save so much of this, so many issues for people, and make it easier. So,
Is
up
this
to
a
you.
document, is it always hot pink? Because
No.
I remember, not because of
Kim.
an LGBT thing, but I just remember I went to my doctor and for the first time and the only time, my doctor gave me this front and back thick paper hot pink form that had the 2 holes at the top to go into my file that I was supposed to fill out for, the future what if type thing. And I think that's what it was. I never did it, but of course, like most people, but I think that's what it was.
Ladies and gentlemen, I went to the website. Any of you can go online and just put in Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare, California. Please know it's maybe different in every state. And what you do here in California may not be obeyed or followed if your partner dies in another state. Your marriage may not be recognized, your authority may not be recognized. So we're only talking about what happens in California. And the advice I got from our corporate lawyer about this was, first of all, I cannot give you legal advice. Number 2 is the liability becomes dangerous when we're talking about burial or we're talking about cremation. But if you can just get transportation done and have the person wherever they died brought back into our state, now you're in control. So you can get that part done. Just get the body here. Then you're in control. Because if it's in another state, it could be very different.
But there's still challenges associated with that. If they
Yes.
die in Mississippi, and the family, the birth family is there, and they don't want to let go of the body, they have that right, no matter if you're fully married in California.
It can become a court battle. Am I right, Alma?
Yeah, you know, it's like what we say in the law, 80% of rights are possession. So when you have a hold of it, it's easier to have leverage, whether it's money or the body. Your California directive will actually, if it's valid in this state, is going to be recognized in other states, but whether they choose to follow it or ignore it is a different issue. And the reason why when people move to other states, we strongly recommend they update the documents is because, like, I'm sorry, your name again? Lori. Like Lori was saying, the forms are different in all states and slightly different. And if they're not used to seeing it, like, you know, if you're in the hospital here and you have a Mississippi healthcare directive, the doctors might be like, wait a second. And then they have to ask the question and then send it to the legal department to make sure that it actually, the format, because it doesn't look like the California directive. And that's the issue, one of the main issues between the states. And definitely not, hopefully after June, we're not going to have the issue of non-recognition from other states. But since we currently have the issue, yes, that if don't rely on just your marriage, and this is where it's particularly important for LGBT couples, don't just rely on your marriage and don't just rely on your domestic partnership, but also do the document, because then you have something that you can actually hold people liable for not honoring.
Good point. Any other questions? Yes.
Thanks. Is the durable power of attorney, is that the same as the healthcare directive, or is that one and the same?
In California, the statutory document's called the Advanced Healthcare Directive, and it's made of 4 different parts, of which one of the part is actually the durable power of attorney for healthcare. That's where you appoint somebody. The other parts include things like what you normally hear of as your living will, and that's where you say when you want to pull the plug, to put it gently, and you can also have parts in there about disposition of remains, who's your primary physician, and any other wishes. It used to be, before the year 2000, we used to have different documents. There used to be a separate durable power of attorney for healthcare, and you had to do a separate living will. But I actually really like the fact they integrated it into one document, because what would happen is people would do one part and not the other, and this kind of forces people to answer all the questions.
So if we leave here learning one thing, it's to do the Advanced Healthcare Directive is probably the most important thing you can do.
That's a really good takeaway to take from today.
And just one other question. So if you do that, and let's say I name my husband to pull the plug on me, and knowing my husband, he's not going to be able to do it, what happens at that point when he's in the hospital room and my wishes are for him to pull the plug and he can't do that? What happens?
Then they won't pull the plug, most likely. So I know you love your husband, but it's really important in your healthcare directive that if you want people to follow your wishes and you don't think they can, that you name a co-agent or you name specific instructions like, you know, over my healthcare but not over pulling the plug, or, you know, that you're very specific about it. And a lot of people, like people were saying here on the panel, a lot of people don't name their spouses or their partners, even though they love them very much and trust them on many other things.
All right. I think that is it. Panel, thank you so much. Really good information. I know I've learned a lot. I'm going to get that Advanced Healthcare Directive done. And sometime this year, I'll get that. I promise. Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to come up and speak to the panel.